Hey, welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. Tonight we are getting into production and we're going to start with recording. But before we get recording, there's something we need to take into consideration, and that is the environment that you're recording in. This can be a big problem for some people, and for some people it can be absolutely no issue at all. But it's something should take into consideration because your room is almost assuredly going to affect your capture by imprinting impulse responses and frequency responses on the capture itself. So it's something you have to take into consideration. Most of the time that I'll tell most home recording studio people to listen for serious problems. If you record something and you listen back to it, that if you can hear serious problems, that there's probably a problem. I mean, if you can't hear some serious problem in what's going on, then it's probably not that big of a problem. So that's really something, to really take into consideration. The issue at hand is a couple different things. First of all, you have a frequency response that's going to be early and late reflections that can cause muddiness because it may not be that big of a problem, but when you start to add your own convolution reverb on top of it, it can start causing a problem. So trying to cut that out is an issue. And frequency response, as those early and late reflections come back, whatever material they hit and start to come back is going to affect the frequency content in that capture. So it's not just going to cause reverberation problems, it's going to cause frequency problems. So those are two things that you need to take in consideration. There's a couple different ways you can deal with that. But the biggest thing is to listen for if there is a problem. If there isn't, don't worry about it, because if you do your production well and you go through this series and you do a good job, if it's not really a noticeable problem, you are probably going to deal with any problems you were hearing when you start processing and doing through all your processing and editing and things like that, that it probably not going to be that big a deal. So just listen for serious problems and then deal with those problems. So this really comes down to a couple things that, that's normally how I tell you how to deal with that. Some people, they go all out doing all kinds of room treatment, all kinds of things like that, or they'll go less expensive and they'll put up blinds with blankets. They'll figure out some way to put blankets around the individual when they're recording, or figure out, standing pads, that they've put carpet on, or foam padding with material over it to put around the person, or something on a mic stand that just kind of goes around the individual to where they sing in and it cuts out most of that stuff. There's lots of different solutions if you're having a serious problem. And those are some of the, the best ways that you have to deal with them. But it depends on your budget, and really be sure you need to do it before you start messing with it, because there's a better chance you don't have a serious issue that you need to deal with. Something like REW is something great because you can download this thing, get the microphone, and go through and look at the issues that you're having on your impulse responses, the RT60, clarity, decay, and looking at what's actually happening on the sound. And this is, just a capture in your room, how your room is going to affect the capture and what things it's going to do with the impulse and frequency responses on your room. So I do recommend downloading this, investigating it, and kind of using it on your room and checking it out, because it'll give you a little bit better idea by the time you understand this piece of software that's free and you're actually understanding what you're looking at, that you'll have a lot better understanding what's happening in your room, which is going to be great for you because you're understanding a whole bunch of other concepts that are happening in audio engineering, which it's nothing but good for you to get in there and mess around with it. And it'll help you to understand that way that you don't question what's going on with your room and your environment that much anyway. So I definitely recommend that. And the other thing is that, with the kind of things we talked about, I mean, you can even go in your closet. There's been times where there was a time I used to go in my closet. I can go in my closet, I cleaned out space in my closet, and I'd drag the microphone in there or whatever, but it just got to be a pain in the butt. I'd sweat, it would be hot, I couldn't see my monitor, I couldn't see what was going on. People didn't like it, and it's like, I'm locked in a closet. So that didn't work. I didn't like that too much, but it's an option, So, normally there's some issues. Just Don't go out and spend $5,000 on room treatment just because the Bob did. There's a better chance you probably don't need to worry about it, because what I've found, I'll show you my solution and I'll explain to you why. The first of all, environment is something you need to take into consideration. Second of all, you record some stuff, capture it, listen to it in your monitors and your headphones. Is there a problem? Do you hear a problem? Is there some problem you need to deal with? Are you an idiot? Do you think you're an idiot and you need to send it off to Bob and ask Bob or Timmy and Ralph and Jimmy and Ralph, a bunch of other people to see if they think there's a problem? It wouldn't hurt to have them listen to it, but do they hear a serious problem? They might hear little things. So there's a little bit too much high end, or maybe just a little bit too mid-range, or not enough mid-range, or just a little bit too much bass, but unless one of them just go, it's a huge problem, you got this huge bass trap, blah, your whole recording sounds like that, like somebody cranked the bass all the way up to 10. If you don't hear a serious problem, don't worry about it so much. You'll probably correct it when you start processing and do a good job in producing your capture. Does that make sense? So it's like, because the issue can be very minimal when you might think it's a real big problem, because you're recording your room and the guitar you recorded sounds like that. But if you go and record in this beautiful room in Hollywood or New York City, that it's got this rich tone, it's like, well, bro, when you start EQing it and you start doing your processing on it and you start doing your reverberations and your spatializations, your convolution reverb and all that stuff, it's going to sound like it was in that room anyway. You just got that initial capture to work with. So you're trying to see it that way, so you don't think you got to do all this stuff in your room to try to make it sound like this other room did. It's probably never going to sound like any damn way without you spending thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So I found a really good solution. I'll tell you my solution, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple things that I told you of how to deal with that, and I've come to this other solution. I take my stuff, I record it in my room. If I'm hearing a serious issue, then I address it. I'm like, well, there's an issue. I'm getting this bass response or whatever, but I don't. So, if you do, then you have to address it and find how to deal with it. If it's might be some room treatment or putting a blanket up or whatever you got to do to try to cut off that from coming back in a reflection, in bad impulse and frequency response, then you have to deal with that. And that's pretty simple. And what I just explained to you how to deal with that. So now the other concept is that what I'll do is, if I'm playing in the room, let's say I grab out my guitar and I start playing, I'm going to record it. Okay, and I'm recording it in one spot and it sounds fine. Or if it sounds too teeny or something, I'll try moving them around, facing it in a different direction, or scoot them somewhere else in the room to see if that's really causing an effect on it. If it sounds like it's a problem. If it doesn't really sound like it's a huge problem, then I don't worry about it. So at that point, that I'm basically, it's getting passed off to my editing phase. So this may sound kind of funny dealing with the editing phase before we even started recording, but I chalk it up as that's something I deal with in my editing phase, and I'm not going to worry about it. Because what I'll do when I go through my editing, one of the first things I'll do is I run it through RX6. Now, this piece of software is not free, and you will spend a couple bucks on it, but it's got this Deverb plugin. And trust me, there's all kinds of other stuff that this thing will do that you will eventually, if you really get into recording, mixing, mastering music, you will use it. Trust me, it will pay for itself and saving you tons of headaches later. I love this piece of equipment. But there's this plugin called Deverb. Now this plugin basically will start reducing these early and late reflections in the low, mid, high, and high end, reducing them. So basically what I'll do is I'll run it through there, experiment around it, and see how much I can cut out to where it sounds good. If it starts affecting the audio in a bad way, back off. You're reducing too much and it's causing a problem. Because you'll find more than likely you don't have to reduce it too much to where you really clean up the track. There might be a little bit of early reflections, a little bit of stuff like that, but not much. Does that make sense? That just kind of cleans out that impulse response and the reverberations coming back at it. And you can also deal with it with ADSR. Really, if you look at that video I had on C50 Clarity, that you can actually put an envelope shaper on there and cut off the tail end at the end of it to really clean it up. That's kind of hard sometimes to do on vocals and stuff like that, so you kind of got to be careful with that. On a bass drum or something like that, or a kick drum, you might be able to get away with it and it worked great, but on something like a vocal, it might might be very difficult. So this is a great solution, because then I know in my editing phase I'm going to run it through this, try to cut out some of the reverberations from the room, and lightly, just, you know, reduction a little bit, not heavy, because it'll start sounding funky. I'm telling you, it'll start causing artifacts all over the place. Just some light reduction, just so it doesn't fight with whatever reverb I'm going to use later to do spatialization on it, so it sounds like it's in the room that I want it to sound like. And it does a great job. And it, you know, and I use this tool for all kinds of things. It's not like I spent all this money on, you know, on my room, and I can only, that thing is stuck on my wall. I can't use it to do anything else. It's a bass trap, right? I mean, it's not like I can use it in a studio for something. And so, I mean, that sounds funny, but it just kind of, you know, help you to rationalize the purchase. And then after I get done doing that, I'll go through and do some equalization on it. I'll do a low pass, a high pass filtering, and I might do a little subtractive EQ. If I'm going, well, no, on that capture, the guitar or the vocal sounds a little bit, there's, you know, in the mid-range, I need to high pass, low pass filter it. And then right up here around 2K, there's a little bit in there, and I'll just pull out a little bit to where it sounds okay, it sounds pretty good. I was pulling out any serious problems. Because when I go to EQ it later and do my convolution and reverb later, that it's gonna add whatever frequency content that I want. And if you watch that C50 Clarity guides, you'll see how on some of those impulse responses I cut out the frequency content, besides, you know, cutting down the impulse responses length themselves, which is a really good video to watch, because it's really will kind of hit home between this and that, why that's happening, why I was doing impulse responses like that. So that's a really good solution, the solution I came up with that works really well, that I have a couple tools that I use in the studio anyway that take care of all those problems. So just take that into consideration. If you're going to a nice studio, you know, and you're dealing with spatialization, let the pro show you where to put things. And if it doesn't sound right, tell them it doesn't sound right, and have them move you around until you get to where it sounds the way it does. Or it might not be the right room to record in. And so that goes with anywhere you go, whether you're going to a big studio, a mid-sized studio, or a small studio. Just take the space into consideration, understand it's going to affect the sound, and look for problems. If there's problems, deal with the problems. If there isn't any problems, if you do the processing well later and you do the production well, it probably is not going to be that big a deal. Because I've done recordings of vocals in little rooms and then cleaned them up, and then by the time I got done processing them, they sound like they were done in a Taj Mahal, bro. And it's like you would have never known that that was done in some little home studio. Because if you do a good job, you can do magic in the studio. And you've got stuff that you cleaned up real well, that the plugins and the processors and the audio engineering concepts you can use can do magic to make things beautiful. The problem is you don't want garbage trying to mix in with the beautiful thing you're trying to do that causes garbage. Does that make sense? So you're going to want to clean stuff up so it's nice and clean for when you start sound sculpting and doing your EQ work and your convolution reverbs and that the capture itself, some crap from the room doesn't fight with that, causing it to be messy and muddy and things like that. So you want to clean it up as much as possible, and that's a couple serious, you know, really easy ways to do it, to get it done. That way your environment isn't that big of a concern and causing a big issue with your production, because that is one of the primary concerns. Because if you don't deal with this issue and there is a problem that you don't understand or you're not dealing with, you can do the whole rest of the production perfect. And there's a chance that it may not completely destroy the production, but it's definitely going to affect it, if that makes sense. So, I mean, the better you do the production, the less that it will affect it, but you understand the concept. So, because I try to tell people that the recording phase is one of the most important phases, because if you get it done well, this phase, that you can just have so much fun and do magic in the studio with these captures that you have. So take this into consideration. Take your environment and your room into consideration, and really think about what I was telling you and what you really think is pertinent, what you need to do. And if you really can't figure it out, ask around some people who really know what they're talking about, and maybe have somebody professionally treat your room if it's having serious problems. Otherwise, you can probably deal with the problems very simply with the ways that I talked about, that are more likely going to solve any problems and deal with any issues you might have, so that you got some pretty clean tracks to work with, and so that you can do magic in the studio with the captures that you have. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this first video on our recording phase of our master series, and I will see you in the next video.